Historic Landmarks Commission here on May the 4th be with you. Let me review our public hearing procedure. You can submit comments here in writing. We have 2 so far. If you wish to make a comment, please fill it out and bring it in. The only person here is Cindy, so I don't really need to go through this. Approval of the minutes from a previous meeting. Anybody have any additions, changes, questions? Nope. Can I have a motion then?
Motion to approve the minutes.
Great. I'll second that. All right, a motion made by Kenton and seconded by Mike, and roll call votes. John?
Aye.
Mike?
Aye.
Kenton? Aye. Carlton?
Aye.
Amanda? Aye. Michael?
Aye.
And I say yes, and Emily is out sick, so that passes. The minutes are approved. All righty. I have no report as the chair. Do you as the vice chair? Okay. Report of the director. Got a report?
We have just a couple of things. One thing I wanted to update the commission on is there are 2 new local historic district designations, and those are currently moving through the process. And the last step was that that happened was the director's reports had to be accepted by City Council, and that just happened on Tuesday. So those will be moving through the process. The next steps are the community meeting, the virtual open house, and then they'll come to you all for a public hearing, and then on to the Planning Commission. So.
And where are those 2?
They are both in the Yellcrest area.
Okay. Groovy. All right. Anything else?
Yes, Mayor Mendenhall initiated a petition to change, to do a text amendment for demolitions or violations of the preservation overlay, specifically to encourage individuals to get permits and go through our process when it comes to demolitions of contributing buildings. And we have a draft code, but essentially because, and I won't get into all this, we'll get into all of this when it comes, because of the fee structure and how essentially punitive we can be, which isn't much under our code right now. We have limitations. If one doesn't go through the HLC process or get building permits, it's basically stipulating that that contributing structure will be rebuilt.
Interesting.
So stay tuned.
Okay, we will. Thank you. Director, general public comments. I have one. Cindy Cromer. Come on down.
I could be running right up on the end of 2 minutes on this one. I'm not making any progress with the qualifications for contributory status. This is actually really technical. It was triggered by finding out that the building at the southeast corner of 300 South and 600 East was designated as non-contributory in the last survey. I have found some highly qualified people who agree with me that the building has contributory characteristics. I anticipate that the developer is planning to demolish and will want you to grant a reduction in front yard setbacks. Phooey. The front yard setback is essential to the existing streetscape, which is one of the finest in the Central City Historic District. There's far too little consideration of the importance of the streetscape and designations which seem to focus on individual structures. This is a challenging issue for me, but I'm not letting go because the RFP for the survey of the Central City Historic District is now in progress, thanks to the commendable efforts of staff. Here are some of the consequences which I believe will occur as a result of a new survey for Central City. A few mid-century buildings may be added to contributory status. Errors made in the 2012 and 2013 ERA survey may be identified. The boundaries will change because of the continued erosion of the Central City District, where we have lost 51 contributory structures since the formation of the district, and we are losing more buildings as they are removed from contributory status without a public process. We will have blocks with isolated contributory resources protected by my heroes, such as Cowboy Partners and the owners of former Every Blooming Thing. These owners must be made whole for doing the right thing and protecting their historic resources while the district was in place. I anticipate that entire blocks could be removed from the district. So there has to be a tool for making the surviving historic resources the assets which their owners deserve. The tax credits will require the buildings to be standalone landmarks. That is going to be a challenging threshold in the city's only working-class historic district. The tool we need and have needed for a long time is the transfer of development rights. Oops, I got beeped. Property owners who have chosen to protect their historic resources in what was once designated as a historic district have to be made whole. Thanks.
Thanks, Cindy. And I have no other cards, so we will move on. And just for the record, all the people that just voted were present, and we have staff tonight of Amy and Michaela and Lex and Aubrey in attendance as well. We're going to move into a work session. First item is window requirements for new construction in local historic districts, and Lex is going to be presenting the information for us tonight. Da-da-da, have at it.
Thank you.
Lex, can you hit the click share? Oh, thanks. Just perfect. Thank you.
Good evening. I just want to start this off by saying that we did conduct a field trip tonight to look at windows in various buildings around the Capitol Hill District, and there were 6 commissioners present. And again, I thank you for taking the time to do that field trip with me. Back in March, Michaela and Amy graciously sat in on a work session for me. I was out of town to talk about window requirements for new construction in the city's local historic districts. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. And again, tonight, we're asking you to provide input on the use of vinyl windows in new construction projects in local historic districts around the city. And the reason that we're doing this is to ensure that the ordinance standards and guidelines are clear in regard to windows and new construction projects, and to provide consistency in reviews and clear expectations for applicants when developing project plans. So the considerations that we have presented to you, I will read again for tonight, is should we allow the use of vinyl windows in new construction? Should we prohibit the use of vinyl windows in new construction? Should we allow for a hybrid use of vinyl windows in new construction based on location, installation, and siding materials? And there were several questions that came out of the work session in March. I've listed those questions. I watched the hearing on YouTube and distilled this list of questions that is on the page, the first page of the work session memo that you have for tonight. And one of those questions was, what is meant by the use of the word hybrid in terms of vinyl windows? There seemed to be a little bit of confusion, and what I meant by the term hybrid was not a hybrid material, it was the hybrid use of different types of windows in any given structure. For instance, you may have wood windows, wood-clad windows, and you also may have on that same structure vinyl windows or composite windows. So when we're talking about hybrid, it just means the use of multiple types of windows in any given structure. So that was one of the questions. Going back to the issues with the current standards and design guidelines, there is ambiguity in terms of vinyl as an appropriate and durable window material. Our code does talk about vinyl, but it does not specifically talk about vinyl windows. The other thing that is ambiguous at this time is the manner in which windows are installed in any given plane, in any given building facade. There's also inconsistencies between our design guidelines and our residential and multifamily design guidelines. Those should really be consistent, and at this point, they are somewhat inconsistent. Another one of the questions that came up was regarding some of the research that we had done in some of the cities that we had contacted to ask how they deal with this issue. One of them, surprisingly, was Charleston, and Charleston actually has written policy regarding the use of vinyl windows. I've included that in your packet tonight. They do allow them. The other one that was actually really interesting was New Orleans. For me, I'm from the South. When you think about historic cities, it doesn't get any more historic than Charleston or New Orleans, Savannah. And so to hear that they do allow the use of vinyl windows in certain instances was actually very interesting. Again, that written document from Charleston is in your packet. New Orleans does not have that written, but just verbally, they indicated to me that they allow the use of vinyl windows because a lot of the historic districts that they have in the city, there are people who are economically challenged, and therefore they do allow those folks to install vinyl windows, which are typically less expensive.
Also, aren't those areas extremely moist and humid and susceptible to termites? So would that be a reasonable reason to put in vinyl?
That's also certainly a reason, and I can attest to the humidity, which I don't miss.
Why we don't live there, right?
Right.
Yes.
We gave you several examples of windows at the last work session. Just have a few of those again. We saw tonight various examples of windows, how they're installed in relation to the cladding material. We looked at some historic windows, and we noticed the difference in dimensions of historic windows versus vinyl windows. I'm going to flip through these examples real quick. I just wanted to point this one out. This building had some inset windows, and on secondary facades, they had vinyl windows that were installed flush with the wall plane. And when I'm talking about hybrid, I think we're trying to get direction from you as to whether or not that is something that we would like to pursue. This is another project. This is the Masonic Temple Apartments that we had talked about earlier. And they did a pretty nice job in the windows that they installed, the windows, the style of the window, the manner in which they're installed, worked out really nicely.
Who was the builder?
I don't know who the builder was. Dustin Holt took this through the project. He was their representative, so I didn't deal with the builder.
DB Urban Communities is who he works for, Dustin Holt.
DB Urban Communities?
Yep.
DB Urban Communities.
Okay.
And this is another project that Amy worked on that was just a nice example. Although these windows are a composite window, you can see how they're installed in the building facade in various materials, and they have that recessed installation, which gives the window and the plane some relief, some depth. One of the things that we did between the last work session and tonight is we actually went window shopping, literally. Amy and Aiden and I went to a couple of window showrooms here in town because there was a question that came up in the previous work session regarding the quality of vinyl windows, and is there a difference in quality? And what we found out was actually super interesting. And this photograph kind of clearly shows the difference in quality. And what we found out was that quality in vinyl windows really has to do with the number of chambers in the frame. It has to do with the glass and how many coats of UV protection, glass sunscreen, I guess, in each of in each of the panes, and the quality really had to do with the number of chambers and what may or may not be in those chambers. So this window that you have here on the left was kind of a basic vinyl window. You can see that it has fewer chambers and it doesn't have any sort of fill. The second window there in the middle has more chambers. It has a fiberglass chamber insert, which, according to the person that we spoke with, adds to the rigidity of the window. The third window on the right has a foam fill, which has to do with the insulating properties of that window. The interesting thing that I found with this is that the dimensions in these windows are almost identical in terms of the thickness. So the quality really had to do with the number of chambers, the type of UV on the glass, and what may or may not be filling those chambers. But in terms of the dimensions of the windows, they were virtually identical. Here's a picture of a window. It's a vinyl window. You notice that the dimensions of the rails and the stiles are pretty narrow.
What's the style?
The stile is this portion of the window on the sides. The rail is this. So this is a sash, this is a sash, this is a rail, this is a rail. The stiles are the sides. You notice also in this window that it's very simple. It's very boxy. It's got a very clean, kind of flat appearance to it. We also looked at wood windows in the showrooms, and you can see a real difference in the type of kind of decorative features, the dimensions between the vinyl and the wood window. So, again, tonight we're seeking your direction on how we want to try to address this issue in our code. And again, these are the questions that we have posed. And at this point, I would love to entertain any questions that you may have, any sort of discussion from the field trip, anything that I can clarify. But I would really like to get some direction tonight so that we can move forward with this code change.
Commissioners, let's just go around one at a time. Down here, let's start with you.
I'm wondering, with the vinyl, there's clearly different quality, different grades of that. And I'm assuming, I think there was reference to Fibrex as being another material versus wood. So what am I trying to say here? It seems to be more of an appearance thing with the vinyl windows versus a quality issue. Is that accurate to say?
I would say, yes, I would say that is accurate. It is an appearance thing. As we saw on the field trip, typical old historic windows have, for lack of a better term, larger dimensions. They're not quite as narrow. They are more decorative. They have more planes to them. Which reminds me too, I wanted to talk a little bit about durability. One of the things that we talked to the representatives about was, are vinyl windows durable? And we heard that they can last from anywhere from 10 to 40 years, depending on where they're placed, if they have direct sun exposure, and also the color of the window. They make vinyl windows in dark browns, blacks, and of course, if those are in the sun, they absorb heat, and they're more likely to warp and fail. So yes, to answer your question, it is a lot to do with appearance.
I'm thinking from a developer's perspective and looking at the dollars and cents, and if they said, hey, we've got this great high-quality vinyl window that we get the most bang for our buck, and that's why we need to go with this one. That's the argument. We're still going to come back and go, it looks like a vinyl window on a front-facing building. So
I think
it's pretty clear-cut to me in terms of,
I think the question there, though, is where is it located and how is it viewed from the public right-of-way? And a vinyl window, it may be a vinyl window that's filled with foam or fiberglass, and that may be perfectly acceptable on a facade that you cannot clearly see from the public right-of-way. Is that acceptable on the street-facing facade? That's kind of the question that we're trying to hash out with you folks tonight.
Was there a question about vinyl windows can last 10 to 40 years? What about wood? What's the life on that? Because in historic districts, we see windows that have been there since the 1800s.
That's true, and if you take care of them, they will last.
Yeah.
they will last hundreds of years because they're old-growth wood.
Right.
Yeah, it just, yeah. Yeah, I don't think I have many more questions because it seems fairly clear-cut in my mind as to why you wouldn't want vinyl in many places, so.
Next.
I just keep flipping back and forth between the photos of the vinyl window that you provided and then the photo of the wood window.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if we could get a little bit more concrete about what we mean when we say that there's more ornamental detail or more like layers.
So are these the two that you're flipping between?
Yeah.
So in this brown area here was just a frame that held this window, but these windows, the rails, the stiles, the sashes were just squared off. Very simple design, not much visual detail as compared to this window. There's some rounded portions of this here. There's more plain. There's different planes, and just the width of this window in this dimension here is a lot wider. That style is wider than a vinyl window. That's what we're referring to.
Okay, that helps. I just wanted to make sure, like, if we get a question about that we would be able to explain what the difference is too, and that helps.
Yeah, and the other thing I put in your packet tonight was some examples of the components of windows. I don't have all of those memorized in my head, and I just thought that might be helpful for you too, as we move through various development proposals to know what the terms are.
Next.
I'm just, Kenton, that's the house that I'm gonna talk about, or the apartments, the very first one that we looked at. And I'm gonna take a little bit,
What's the name of those?
It's called the Deseret Apartments.
All right.
yeah.
on
So when
Main.
we looked at the Deseret Apartments, and then you compared it to the building that was right next door that was even older, this one,
Yes.
okay. I'm gonna take a little bit different tact in that when I look at the materials of the Deseret Apartments, you've got concrete base, you've got brick, you've got, they look like they were precast lintels above and below the window. The top one was a bit more ornamental. You've got metal trim coping at the top of the building, and I think it was probably a metal, at the gables. Every one of those materials are 50-year materials. When you said, vinyl is 10 to 40 years, I think what can probably last 40 years is a vinyl window that's not operable. So it doesn't really matter. The part that gets to be a problem with a vinyl window, especially if it's west-facing or south-facing, and it's darker, it's going to warp a little bit. So moving the upper, lower leaves, that's what gets problematic over the course of time. So if we're all about the, on the Historic Landmark Commission is trying to keep a certain look, the vinyl windows just don't seem to do that over the course of time. especially the darker ones in the, you know, the west and the south exposures. I can see, though, that, you know, if you go back, like, I think it was the second one where you had, where you have the fiberglass or the infill, there's a bit more with window 2 and window 3. You get a bit more heft to the window, so it keeps it from warping, which, you know, which is the real big problem with vinyl windows. That 10 to 40, I think at about 15 to 20 years, vinyl windows are pretty hashed, or at least that's been my experience. Maybe they're better now. So then now if you go, I think it was 2 slides past that where you had your 3, no, keep going. Keep going. No, it wasn't the examples, it was just, you know, what do? We have 3 different choices. You know, we can say yes, we can say no, we have this hybrid thing. It just feels like to me that vinyl windows are not a preference, and they would continue to not be a preference in a historic landmark area. They just don't, because they just won't stand the test of time, I don't think, like all of the other materials that are typically used. You know, can we prohibit the use of them? I don't know that we can prohibit the use, but maybe we can have stipulations for the vinyl windows that indeed it does have fiberglass and it has, you know, the foam infill, and they have some kind of manufacturer's warranty, a specific warranty. You can buy a 15-year roof, a 20-year roof, a 30 roof. Can you buy a 30-year vinyl window?
Doubt it.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's just other manufacturers will stand that test of time, and I think that's what we're really putzing with. The way these things look, if they're designed right, they're not bad. And as you and I talked about, you know, all of this is based on traditional brick, and traditional brick was two weights of brick, and so, you know, you had, you know, 2 5/8, 2 and 3/8, whatever. So you had that twice, so the window could inset. We don't do that anymore. We have a single wide, 2 inches of air gap, you know, the board, and then, you know, the inside. So we have, you know, maybe this much as opposed to that much that we can inset in brick. If you're doing stucco, that's why you see all of the windows that are pushed to the face, because stucco doesn't come with that dimension. It comes with this dimension to start with,
Right.
before it gets to the insulation board. So that's the rub, because I think the look that we're after is the way windows looked in a traditional brick wall originally. That's I mean, everything we're pointing to is we want it, you know, set back. It wants to have enough detail, and that's the way it was made 40 years back. So the use of vinyl windows, I think we as a commission can push it so that it does have a bit more heft to them. It's not that window 1, it's window 2 or 3. And I think that it's not it shouldn't be outside of our purview to, you know, ask or demand that vinyl windows have a warranty that you know, that they can stand behind. Those are my comments.
Can I just jump in to say, is that
If
fine?
we could hear you, you could jump in.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you
Yes.
now,
Okay, so, thank you. The acoustics in this room.
right?
Some of the cheapest windows, vinyl windows, and I heard that argument, that are manufactured in Salt Lake City have lifetime warranties because they're so cheap to
Lifetime
manufacture. Yeah.
Huh.
So when they fail in 3 years, you can just go get another one. And they fail in another year, you can get another one.
And I don't see,
So I mean, we've had the whole warranty discussion and then asked for more data as to failure rates, not just warranties, right? Because it's just all over the board with the vinyl window industry. So I thought I would just throw that in there. And what Lex was saying, like a 10 to 40 year lifetime possibly for vinyl windows, that's what the salesman told us. But we don't believe that in this climate, you would get 10 years lucky. Okay. Thank you.
Which gets into like questions about sustainability and being green.
sorry, I
and
couldn't hear the first
which gets into questions about sustainability and being green. If you have to replace, it has a lifetime warranty, but you have to replace it every 3 years, and that goes into the landfill. That's not a good thing either. I think that, I agree with what you say. I think the other thing that we're wrestling with is we're wrestling with economics here, and I think we're trying to balance what we want to see visually in a historic district and balance that with the actual costs that a developer is going to incur, such that we can get to a point that we can all agree. We can get to yes. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And for the developer, but also the person who buys that condo. And in 4 years, if all the vinyl windows
That's
fail,
true too.
and we made them recess a vinyl window and the warranty for that company in town no longer applies, that's an economic issue as well.
And I often don't see them warping as the failure. The gas in between the glass.
That's from the warping.
Oh, it
Yeah,
is? Okay.
From the
I call it
vinyl.
popping. The windows pop, and then
Windows
the
pop.
condensation,
Okay.
the gas is no longer there.
I wondered how that happened, because that's so common that you get that and there's moisture then in between the two. But you took us up to Marmalade, which, the bottom of Marmalade is somewhat affordable. And so we go back to the economics of not just a developer, but a single resident trying to upgrade their home, and vinyl is going to be cheaper than wood.
True.
Yeah. You have comments?
Going kind of a different direction, a lot of the language of our new construction in a historic district revolves around making the building a product of its own time. But on the other hand, it seems like we're trying to get as close to historic wood windows as we possibly can. Where's like the balance there? Or I guess if I was a developer building a new building, I would just want to just go completely away from double hung windows altogether then, and build like a storefront or like an aluminum, or like in the Post District, they built the big Post District apartment basically uses like a steel casement look-alike. So I guess how does this conversation fit into that larger context?
A couple of thoughts. One, when we're looking at new construction, I think the primary thing that we're looking at is trying to have the new construction be compatible with surrounding development. That's one thing. And the second thing I was going to say, shoot, I can't remember.
Old age.
Yeah.
It'll be back in 5 minutes.
It's that, and I'll let you collect your thoughts. Absolutely product of your own time, absolutely not visually obtrusive, but to fit in with the context, there's a lot of discussion as well of using materials that are found within the historic context. And part of that also is durability of that material as well.
So taken as a whole, if the project or the building is a product of its own time, but it should be made up of kind of constituent compatible materials.
Yes. And the thing
Could
that,
you- wait a
and
minute,
I
can you
remember
say
what I was
that?
going to say now.
Okay.
The other thing that we do in new construction is, yes, we want it to be a product of its own time, but we also want to incorporate traditional elements into the new construction.
Right.
For example, porch features or materials or things of that nature.
It was also in that, I think it was the second or third townhouse that you showed us, there was a multiplicity of plane where the door was inset, there was a balcony, and instead of being one sheet, one facade, there were like at least 3 or 4 different planes. And in that same one, there was a flush window, but it seemed to be acceptable because of everything else that was on that facade seemed to help that it wasn't just one plane, door, window, everything was within a half an inch of each other.
But those ones that were flush, you didn't even notice them.
That's my
because your
point. There
eyes
was
were
enough going on that it wasn't that noticeable. It seemed to be acceptable because there was a lot of other things going on, and everything else that was going on made it acceptable for, its contents.
True that. Kenton?
Several things come to mind. First, I'll pick up on the idea of a new building being representative of its time. Picture our commission here in 50 or 100 years looking at a building that's built in 23 saying, you want to change that? Well, it's got these vinyl windows. You've got to replace vinyl windows. So, but moving on from there, I would love to just say, no way to vinyl windows on environmental grounds. The vinyl production process is toxic. Vinyl windows typically don't have the insulation values that better windows do. However, that's not in our purview. So we got to kind of set that back and keep it in the back of our minds. You talk about Fibrex, fiberglass, and those are things that I specify sometimes. You can get excellent insulation values out of them. They're durable, but they don't look that much different than the vinyl windows. So you come to in their profiles. Generally we're using them in modern designs, so that's okay. But I think just because they're better materials doesn't change the visual impact in historical. So prohibiting vinyl and saying yes to fiberglass is inconsistent, I think. So we've got to keep that in mind. Another thing about vinyl is that the white color vinyl is the most durable. I typically don't think, in most cases, white windows look good on a building. They give a picture frame. And that might be appropriate sometimes, but you don't want to tell someone to do a dark vinyl window because it looks better on a facade because it won't be as durable. So, I'm just kind of going through a list of things that come up when we think about vinyl.
What colors?
No.
Yeah.
So we can't. Then thinking about warranty issues, and fine if AMSCO wants to replace your window every 3 years or whatever, but if we've encouraged developers, architects, builders to do some sort of recessed detail, say, hey, okay, that looks good. We hit the compromise, and look. Well, a recessed detail is much more complicated and expensive to pull out and replace. So what have we accomplished there? So putting all these kind of bullet points together, I think really we've got to take into account the affordability. We can't be elitist and say, you got to do something more expensive, but a balance, a hybrid like Lex is suggesting, strikes me as probably the best way to go. It gives us the ability to look at projects on a case-by-case basis, examine how they want to use them, get more appropriate windows out front, encourage better detailing on the side facades, and let them make it as ugly as they want on the back. So I think probably a hybrid approach is the way we got to go.
And last but not least,
I would say that my initial reaction is probably along the lines of Kitten's of no vinyl at all, although for different reasons probably, but to his point, there is a reason not to go that direction from an affordability perspective. I think for me, it more so comes down to the context of each specific use, and more importantly, yes, we will get into a situation potentially, where 50 years from now, we're talking about vinyl as an historic material. And there is a conflict between using historic materials or consistent materials and fiberglass or composite materials, which of course are not wood, even though they may mimic those. That said, from a practical standpoint, the visual consistency and visual context of neighborhoods and historic districts is really, for me, the key element. So when it comes to issues such as depth and regress and whatnot, I'm probably more focused on the depth and the structure of the window instead of the specific materials, or maybe the depth and the structure of the window as a more important factor than the material. So I'd be more inclined to a deep fiberglass window than a shallow vinyl window. Those are my initial thoughts. It's interesting to me that there's quite a variety in the buildings that we saw and what's been installed. Just driving around, looking at the houses that we passed, the number of nice 1920s, 1930s brick houses that have terrible window retrofits that we drove by is kind of disappointing. I'd rather us as a commission and as a city avoid that for consistency in historic districts within reason. So finding that middle ground is the challenging part.
Well, and the point of this is just a kind of an open discussion. Can you go to those three options at the end?
Sure.
And let's do a straw poll just for you. The first one, should we say no vinyl windows in new construction? Anyone in favor of that? I'm not doing this verbatim, but just, should we disallow vinyl windows in new construction?
At some point, Lex, you said we should keep it consistent between multifamily and single family, but I'm wondering if we should, because they're completely different economic, like we're talking about the economics of this, but a family building a new house is a lot different than a developer building a 160 unit
Okay, so
apartment.
do we take that in two parts, saying we don't want vinyl windows on larger projects, but it's okay on single-family residences?
Potentially.
Potentially. All right. How many in favor of hybrid? I think most are in favor of hybrid. I don't think we can have one straight law here, rule for any of this. And it is going to have to be case by case. And I just wanted to ask, are you trying to avoid case by case?
No.
Okay, just wondering if there was a hidden agenda here.
I feel like we just want direction,
Okay,
like,
Yeah.
that's great.
yes, we want, like, not saying that, like, yes, hybrid is great, readily visible from the street, so we know what to tell the public and we're all
Yep.
consistent.
I think the majority are saying the hybrid, and it may come down to just case by case.
I think that we can establish reasonable guidelines that developers and architects can use as they
Sure.
go through it, and that, you know, if you are going to use a vinyl window or some sort of shallow window, in order for that to be acceptable, it has to have a certain regress versus a deeper window. Or,
Does that make sense?
yeah, clearly in situations where we don't want to have vinyl windows on a street-facing side, for example, that might be
Do we have a
inappropriate.
rule, though, and I don't know construction that well, Kenton, I'm going to look at you. Would you recess it, have a rule that it always has to be recessed 4 inches or 2 inches for us to consider it?
No, I think it goes on a material basis, depending upon
Okay.
what your facade material is. Just could be something a little more, you could call it vague, or a little bit more flexible, like some sort of a shadow line, a significant shadow line created by the placement of the window with respect to the face of the facade.
Does that make sense? Okay. Any other comments?
But yeah, I think in doing so, we do have to set up some guidelines, because even if it's case by case, we got to be consistent.
Right.
We can't have them saying, well, around the corner, they got to do this, and that's all I'm asking. Because I think
Absolutely.
that's
Yeah.
achievable. The inconsistency is the bugaboo of what we're trying to do here. Inconsistent application of the guidelines.
It is, and that's what we want to avoid too.
Yeah.
I
Is
mean,
enough information for you?
yes, you're providing me with direction, and I think that the direction is, let's look at a hybrid scenario and see what we can come up with.
Okay. And then will you bring it back to us?
Like the Terminator, I'll be back.
Nice. All right. Any other comments before we move on to the public hearing?
Is there any more restriction that we might want to set as a guidance for, I mean, not necessarily written into the rules at this point in time, but do we want to say vinyl windows are only acceptable in a hybrid case if it's not street visible, things of that nature? Or do we want to leave that open-ended?
Let's let them write that up and bring it back to us.
But I think that's part of the guidelines that we'd want to be applying.
Yeah.
I think that we would come back with something
Okay.
like that
All right.
and have you all react to it, add to it.
Yeah, if that's premature, that's fine. I was just asking.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah,
But certainly a
But that
consideration.
will be in there.
great.
Thanks.
Thank you, Lex.
Hey, thank you. This was super productive. I appreciate it.
And we really enjoyed our van tour. Thank you.
I'm glad you did.
And I'm
All right.
sorry I missed it, Lex. We had a family
Kenton,
thing come
it
up.
was a ripper.
We got to tour your house, so that was good.
Chair Delay,
Yes,
before we move on, can I please request that everybody talk directly into their microphones?
yes.
I'm having a hard time hearing back here in my little alcove.
Okay,
Thank you.
we shall do that. All right, we're going to move into public hearings, and we only have one tonight. Our planner is Amy Thompson. It is text amendment related to the H Historic Preservation Overlay District. Is that a typo?
No.
Okay. Mayor Aaron Mendenhall has initiated a petition for a text amendment that would generally impact the H Historic Preservation Overlay District, which applies to properties within a local historic or landmark site and also outlines process and standards for local historic designations, boundary adjustments, and revocation of designation. Ooh, that'd be bad. The purpose of the proposed text amendments is to make the ordinance easier to use for applicants, property owners, staff, and the HLC in its administration, as well as create new processes for adopting and updating historic resource surveys. The proposed amendments involve multiple chapters of the zoning ordinance related to the H district, and changes would apply citywide. And it is case number PLNPCM 2023-00123. So staff, go ahead and tell us what you know.
Yes, thank you. And that was basically my presentation, so.
All right, all in favor? No, sorry.
Yeah, this is a petition that was initiated by Mayor Aaron Mendenhall for a text amendment. Again, it impacts properties in the H Historic Preservation Overlay District. Properties that are impacted by that overlay are properties that are in a local historic district. Salt Lake City currently has 13. Properties within a thematic designation, we currently have 0 of those. And then landmark sites, local landmark sites, and we have approximately 150 in Salt Lake City. This section of code also outlines the process for local historic designation. Amendments, which is essentially expanding or reducing boundaries or revocation of the designation of a landmark site. In terms of the commission's role with this text amendment, it's to provide a recommendation to the city council, who's the final decision-making authority on this type of application. Your feedback on this ordinance is very important, as you all are the ones that your purview is specific to the H Historic Preservation Overlay District. From here on out, I'm just going to call it the overlay. And the proposed amendments will also go to Planning Commission, and they will give a recommendation to City Council. Staff is recommending that the Commission forward a positive recommendation to the City Council on this text amendment. So a lot of this text amendment is reorganization. We are clarifying and reorganizing the overlay chapter, so repetition is removed, process steps are clear, and the timing of those steps is more clear. We are also moving the definitions that are within the overlay district to the actual definitions chapter rather than just living within the overlay. And then we are moving all of the designation, boundary adjustments, revocation of a landmark site to a new chapter. So essentially all of those things are an amendment. Going through that process is a map amendment to add the overlay to any district. So we are moving that process to a new chapter. There's still a reference to it in the overlay. That's likely where a lot of people will look for it. And the processing and steps and standards for designations and amendments are not changing from what currently exists in the code. They've just been reorganized and moved to a different chapter. And then in terms of proposed changes, we're looking to add an applicability section to the overlay to make it clear. Yes, I am going to explain. So right now, if you were to look at the overlay, it's not crystal clear who the chapter applies to. Like, a lot of people think, oh, I live in an old house, and so this chapter applies to me. It's not, or they live in a National Historic District. So we've made it very clear who the chapter applies to. It's properties within a local historic district, landmark sites, or thematic designations. And then it makes it more clear how the standards within that chapter are determined. So there are different standards for contributing buildings versus non-contributing. And right up front, it makes it clear how those standards are determined. We are also proposing to exempt certain work from obtaining a certificate of appropriateness. These are things such as maintenance, small plaques or mailboxes, utility meters, charging stations, and solar panels that are not visible from the public right-of-way. We're also proposing to authorize review of all solar panels at a staff level. Right now, the ordinance requires anything that's on a front-facing facade to come to the Landmark Commission. And in the past, you all have told us that you're not really interested in seeing those. We have brought some that are newer types of materials, like the Tesla solar shingles. Those were kind of a different thing, and so we did bring those to the commission, but we are proposing to have the ability to review those at a staff level. We're also adding in some jurisdiction and authority language for the Landmark Commission. These are actually things that you already do. It's just not identified in the ordinance. So these are things like Salt Lake City is a certified local government, and so you all review National Register nominations and you provide a recommendation to the Board of State History. It also adds in that you could make recommendations to the City Council on development of incentive programs to encourage the preservation of the city's historic resources. So it adds a couple things into the jurisdiction and authority section for the Landmark Commission. There is currently a requirement for mailing a notice for demolition of non-contributing buildings. We're proposing to beef up the requirements for the contents of that mailing notice. For example, it will include a map, date of construction, historic status information from the survey, and will indicate where the materials can be reviewed if anyone's interested in reviewing them, and when a decision will be made by the planning director. Currently, there's not an application fee for economic hardship, boundary reductions, and revocation of a landmark site. So economic hardship can kick in after denial of a demolition. And we did talk to the attorney's office about adding fees to this, and we don't require a fee for designation. Part of that is because designation of local historic districts is, it can be considered as a public benefit. There's benefits to having local historic districts. And so in terms of if somebody wants to reduce a boundary or revoke the designation of a landmark site, or economic hardship, which is a process they can choose to go through if demolition is denied, or in the case of a landmark site, that's the only option they have for demolition if it's not deemed to be unsafe by the building official. So yes, we are proposing a fee for economic hardship as well. Let's see, I think it's on the last page of the staff of the draft. Yeah, I can look it up after this presentation. It also adds in 2 new definitions to the definitions chapter. These are already referenced in the zoning ordinance, but it actually defines them into the definitions section. So it's the 2 definitions are period of significance and historic integrity. And then it adds language to clarify that the City Council adopts the historic resource surveys that accompany local historic district designations. In terms of new processes, We are looking to create a new process in the ordinance and factors to consider for updates to historic resource surveys. And it creates a new process and factors to consider for historic status changes in city records. So historic status is meaning whether a building is contributing or non-contributing. And this particular process is for individual buildings in certain circumstances. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about these two on the upcoming slides. So all of Salt Lake City's local historic districts have associated resource surveys. As a best practice and consistent with policies in the community preservation plan, surveys should be updated approximately every 5 to 10 years. And this text amendment essentially puts this process into our zoning ordinance. Historic resource surveys provide an understanding of which properties should be protected and how to incorporate preservation goals into community planning efforts. The Commission is probably aware of this, but for the benefit of the public, a survey generally consists of written report summarizing the history. You can see an example there of the table of contents from one of our surveys, just in terms of the example of the kinds of things that the report outlines. It talks about development patterns, physical characteristics of the study area. There's an inventory of all properties within the district and a historic status rating for each property. These are accompanied by maps, photographs, as well as recommendations. So again, these are some examples. This specific one is from Central City. You'll see the map on the right-hand side, and it will have whether or not the building is contributing or non-contributing in that. There's other maps within there that will show kind of the variation between the buildings and their periods of significance. And then it will have a data sheet showing the construction year, generally the type and style of the construction, and then it will have any notes. So generally this is where the consultant would put if there were alterations or anything that happened or why, the building was what it was rated. Also, anything that's out of the period of significance is rated out of period, and that also means non-contributing. So the period of significance there can be multiple periods of significance. If you look at the example on this table of contents for this particular district, the initial settlement period was from 1847 to 1869. The transition period was from 1870 to 1899. Mature community is between 1900 to 1922. And so the surveyor will identify, buildings that are representative from that time period, events that took place that could potentially be a period of significance. It could be as long as, 20, 30, 40 years to a short time span if it was some kind of artifact or something like that.
Oh. Okay.
A notable period that helped tell the story of Salt Lake City.
Yeah.
Oh, that makes sense. Interesting.
Current survey information is needed to capture changes within the district and allow for the continuing evaluation and modification, if necessary, of district boundaries and lists of contributing structures over time. Accurate information on properties and districts helps ensure that the time and resources of the preservation program are efficiently directed to the appropriate locations. They must be updated periodically to address new properties that may now be considered contributing due to their age. This is typically 50 years or older. I want to point out that age alone does not determine whether a building is eligible for contributing status, and it's important to acknowledge that what's perceived as historic and worth preserving may evolve and change over time. Updates to historic resource surveys could also expand the period of significance. So that means that, if this Central City survey were updated, buildings that are currently out of period, the surveyor may expand the period of significance or recommend expanding that period. And so potentially buildings that were listed as out of period could then be eligible for contributing status if the survey update was adopted by City Council, if the building retains historic integrity, and that sort of thing. So over time, maintenance can impact the status of a historic property. A property owner may defer maintenance of their property, which leads to a deterioration, and then the structure may no longer qualify to be contributing. Alternately, alterations could be made that reverses a past modification and enables the structure to now qualify as contributing. Survey updates also capture structures listed in an older survey that may have been demolished. A lot of times when we think of status changes, I think we think of buildings that are going from contributing to non-contributing. So I just wanted to highlight these two. These were caught in the updates that for surveys, and before it was a non-contributing building, and then after it became contributing after they reversed some alterations that impacted the historic integrity.
Those bottom two are the same place?
Yes.
Oh, that is way crazy.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yes.
So the contributing versus non-contributing aspect and the determination of whether a property is or is not contributing.
Oh, wait, and it's not just the property, it could be the roof,
Yeah.
a piece of the property.
Clearly, in a situation like the one on the top, it looks like maybe in the 50s, maybe in the 60s, some of these awnings were added, changes were made to the structure.
Crazy.
But where does a modification to the original structure that was done quite some time ago render that non-contributing in the time period that it was constructed, but possibly contributing in the period that it was modified? For example, if you take a brick house and that was built in 1912, and you put stucco on it in 1933, and we're here 60 years, 70, 80 years later, is that property no longer contributing because it was modified from its original form, or is it still contributing because it was modified in a historic period in the development of the city?
Great question.
I think in terms of contributing status, and by no means am I an expert. That's why we hire consultants to do the surveys that are experts and meet the qualifications of the National Park Service. But in terms of what you're talking about, adding like stucco or something to a building, generally we look at things that can be reversed. Some things are reversible. Something like stucco is typically not. A lot of times they will put up chicken wire, put it into the side of the building so that the stucco will stick to something. And it's just not reversible as some other things are. And then I think...
But then is it contributing or non-contributing with that change?
If stucco has been added to a building, we have said that it is non-contributing.
Okay.
And that is because that is not something that can be altered. You'll see an example coming up when I talk about historic status determinations, and it was one that I included in the staff report. And on that one, we did consult with the State Preservation Office. There had been a number of alterations to it, and regardless of if any of those alterations were reversed, if all of them were reversed, the sheer fact that stucco was added to that building, they would not be eligible for tax credits or contributing in terms of the state's program. And again, the state and the city are two different entities. Ours is regulatory, theirs is not. It's honorary and incentive based, but we do try to maintain consistency with them so that we ensure calls that we're making on contributing status are consistent in terms of eligibility for the tax credits. So I don't know if that exactly answered your question, but
Sometimes it's a cumulative effect of change, of inappropriate changes, where it's just, and one reversible building material change, where it's just, this is just
I was just curious about that in the context of if we're looking at it as a baseline from when the building was constructed in its absolute original form, or if there's a period of time where it was, I'm pulling something out as just an example here, where a neighborhood, for whatever reason, and it might be an historically significant reason, went through and stucco was added to a bunch of buildings for some, historic event or reason. Does that invalidate the historic value and the contributing value of those structures? It might from 1912, but from the 1930s and 1940s period. It's just an interesting question that I debate. Anyhow, I don't mean to get us off track.
no, that's okay. I appreciate the question. One thing that's sort of similar in what you're talking about, but I guess a little bit easier for me to wrap my brain around, is a lot of people that have replaced porch elements with like the black licorice style of railing that was popular at one time. And then now we're seeing a lot of people go back to restoring their porch to something, more like the original. I don't know in all of those cases that has completely changed the contributing status of those buildings if they've gone to a black licorice, porch element, because it's generally reversible. And so there are also buildings that are contributing not necessarily because of their architectural merits. It may be because of association with an important person that lived there. And so we have buildings that are listed as contributing, and they've had a number of alterations to them that may impact the physical integrity of the building, but in terms of the association with a person that lived there or built the structure, that may still be evident. So in terms of the proposed text amendment, updates to historic surveys would be a city council level decision. It would have a public process leading up to the city council decision with public hearings with the Planning Commission and the Historic Landmark Commission. It's important to note that updates to a historic survey cannot change the existing boundaries of the survey. So if an update is done we'll use Central City since that was the example in the previous slide, the boundaries can't be changed even if City Council decides not to adopt the update. Nothing changes with the boundaries. The only thing that could change the boundaries with the survey update is, the only thing that can change the boundaries of a local district is an amendment. The survey could, however, have recommendations in it to reduce the boundaries. So there could be an outcome of a recommendation to reduce boundaries of a district based on, areas that may no longer be contributing. And that would have to move forward as an amendment, not with the survey update.
Have we reduced any boundaries in the recent past?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. No, I didn't think so.
No.
No, we currently have a process in our ordinance to do it, but we have not done that.
And there are suggestions in like Central City reconnaissance level surveys to look at the boundaries specifically for South. Is that appropriate? Is that not appropriate?
And then the last thing that I wanted to talk about in terms of new processes that we're adding is historic status determinations. So this is a process that would be for individual properties within a local historic district. This is not a wholesale survey update like I was just talking about. This is for individual properties that may warrant reconsideration, or for properties that, for whatever reason, don't have a rating. This would be done through an administrative interpretation. That type of application in terms of the status determination could be initiated by the property owner or by the planning director. In order to make those determinations, we would look at specific considerations outlined in the ordinance. So one of those things is an updated resource survey. That's review of an intensive level survey. So a lot of the surveys that we do for the wholesale survey updates, those are reconnaissance level surveys. It's not financially feasible for us to do intensive level surveys for all of the buildings within a local historic district.
To say you don't do the surveys, you always hire them out?
We hire, a historic survey has to be done by a consultant that meets the National Park Service standards, so it's like an architectural historian.
Who pays for that?
We've paid for them in various ways. Previously, we used to use CLG grants. We've partnered with the RDA in the past. City Council has allocated funding for
But not the
new
property
surveys.
owner.
The property,
Right.
in this case, yes. If somebody is requesting an administrative interpretation or determination, they need to pay for, the city's not going to pay for an intensive level survey.
And off the top of your head, what do they cost?
They cost about $1,000.
Okay, thank you.
At least that was the amount that we were quoted for some buildings in the warehouse district. So
Great.
I think it depends on the consultant you hire. And then the second consideration is alterations, and if alterations have occurred, whether or not they're reversible, whether the building contributes to the understanding of the contextual historic significance of the district, and then lastly, historic integrity, and that is defined by the National Park Service as location, design, settings, materials, workmanship, filling, and association. Location is where the place where the property was constructed. Design is the combination of elements that create form, plan, space, structure, and style. Setting is the physical environment of the historic property. Materials are the physical elements that were combined during a particular period of time, a particular pattern or configuration. Workmanship, feeling is the property's expression of the historic sense of a particular period of time, and association, again, is a direct link between an important event or person and a historic property. So as discussed in the staff report, historic status determinations are something that the zoning administrator is already authorized to do. They are authorized to make interpretations of code standards. We are just proposing this process is put into ordinance. I want to go over a few examples of historic status determinations that have been rendered. These are also included in the staff report. This first example is a property that was unrated. You may remember this property. It came before the Landmark Commission, I believe, last month for a window replacement. It was rated as contributing in the earlier surveys. We typically go off of the most recent survey to determine contributing status. For whatever reason, this property was just left out. You can see in the map below, there's just no square. If there's sometimes that we'll find a discrepancy like, oh, there's, nothing noted on the map, but then we can verify it with the data sheet or the photo sheet. In this case, it's not on either of those. So these are situations where a timely determination needs to be administered so that we know what standards apply to this property. Obviously, it's very clear just by looking at the photo of this property that it retains historic integrity, and so this property is considered contributing. The next two examples that I want to discuss, because these are ones that are commonly brought up by the public. In the example on the left, the status was changed from contributing to non-contributing. This building was listed as a contributing building in the 2013 reconnaissance level survey. The property owner disputed this historic status, arguing that the building should be non-contributing. They submitted an application for a determination along with an intensive level survey. The zoning administrator found this property's historic status should be changed because of alterations made to the structure that made the historic integrity of the building no longer evident. Alterations included an addition to the side. So if you can see right on the right of the picture where Big Daddy Pizza is painted, that whole portion and those windows, that is a new addition to the front of the building. So essentially like widen the building by almost half. Additionally, there was a side addition, vinyl replacement windows in the primary portions of the north and south elevations, and removal of cladding. Finally, this example on the right is one that I was mentioning earlier when Commissioner Genst asked about the stucco being added to a building. This building was listed as non-contributing in the survey, and the determination confirmed the non-contributing status of the building. So there was no change to this. We confirmed what was already done by the consultant. This one actually was brought up by the property owner, and the city actually initiated this administrative interpretations because we ended up having questions as to whether the contributing status was incorrect. Alterations to this building include stucco, installation of vinyl siding on the third floor, replacement windows on the secondary facades, the enclosure of the front porch, the wrapped columns and glass, replacement of the entry stairs. Many of these changes can be reversed. However, the application of the stucco is not considered a reversible change. This property was specifically called out in the survey update as something that was changing from contributing to non-contributing. This information was available to the public. There was a public hearing that was held, and with the Landmark Commission. So this information was all available in the staff report at the time when this building changed from a previous survey to non-contributing and then was confirmed later in a determination. In terms of public process for this particular application for text amendments, notice is sent to all recognized city organizations. We also held a virtual open house. On that virtual open house page, the draft ordinance is there. And actually, with this particular ordinance, I included notes in the draft ordinance to indicate, this is not being deleted, this is being moved, because if somebody just were to look at the ordinance right off the bat, it kind of looks like we're deleting a lot of things if you don't understand that we're moving them. Sugar House Community Council invited us to attend. I attended that meeting, and as well as Central City, and that meeting was just held yesterday. We've received 2 formal public comments, and one of those was included in the staff report, and the other was just received this morning, and that was added to your Dropbox. And again, staff is recommending that the Landmark Commission forward a positive recommendation on this petition to the City Council.
Thank you, Amy. Do we have questions?
I actually have one question.
Oh, just
about the
one?
solar
You can have
panels
2.
that apparently other people have not liked to review. And I don't feel strong one way or the other. I will say, though, that I've seen a prevalence of solar panels added to historic buildings lately where they're papered all over, and including on the front and the visible facades, and it doesn't look great, in my opinion. I was curious about that. How staff goes about administratively approving those, or would do so in the future, and maybe some question to some of the commissioners as to exactly what's the desire to avoid having to review any of those in the future, or clearly in the past there's been a preference not to deal with it. Quantity.
Sorry. Amy, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, so I was just going to go to, in terms of the review, we did leave what's in the ordinance related to priority locations. Sorry, I'm just going to try and get to it to find it. If you don't want to have a seizure, don't watch me scroll. Okay, so there are still these priority locations within the ordinance that we did not change. It's just what we did change is right now it says anything that's, E or F, I think has to be sent to the Landmark Commission, can't be administratively approved. So somebody still has to go through this and say, like, this needs to be the first priority in a rear yard location not readily visible, on an accessory building or structure. And so what staff does in terms of an administrative review with an application is we would look to see, if they've just started with on the front facade of the building, we're going to ask, like, okay, is there somewhere in your rear yard that you can put this that's not readily visible? If there's not, is there an accessory building? Is there somewhere in your side yard? And we have asked for information from the solar companies in terms of energy collection, and generally we have not approved anything on the front facade unless they have shown us that there's literally nowhere else that they can get this kind of the energy collection they can get from wherever it is.
Would you say applications are coming in by the thousands now, or how many of these are you actually dealing with right now?
I don't think we're dealing with a lot of them right now, but one thing to note is Salt Lake City did just do their Salt Lake City solar program last year, and that was the first one that they did. And so the city sponsored companies to go out and give, I think, a reduced rate to get solar. And we tried to work with sustainability to make that COA process a little bit more streamlined, as we've done with other programs like Fix the Bricks. But I don't think we're getting a ton of applications for solar on front facades that I'm aware of.
And there's also a big issue about recycling solar panels. They are generally not, and they need to stay out of our landfills. I don't know if we have any kind of instructions that way about recycling them, but that's a different topic, but maybe something you can think about. Because it's definitely something that's going to improve, I'm sure, in the number of applications as we all try and be a little more environmentally correct. Questions, other questions?
Well, I was just going to say, based on what I've seen in the avenues and the visibility of some of those panels, I have the sneaking suspicion that there's a lot of installations that are not getting the appropriate review.
And that could be, I'm not aware of a bunch
Cindy,
of
you're not doing your
front-facing front-facing facade solar panels that we've issued, but I know that there have been a few. But we do try to work with them to make sure that
Yeah.
there's no other place that they could put them.
That was the reason for my question. Thanks.
Other questions?
Amy, you said something about clarifying the timing of the process.
Right.
And I want to know a little more about that. Because I know we always have the debate of like, did they bring this project too early or too late to the commission? So is that kind of what you're talking about?
No, in terms of, that's not what I'm talking about, but I do understand that concern with timing of just whether it's brought to a work session or they have a complete application. It's more the timing of, for example, when a COA can be issued. So right now, a COA for demolition has a bunch of requirements that have to happen before it can actually be issued for demolition of a contributing building. And that was way buried down in the ordinance. So it kind of keeps all of the process steps in the same section, and then all of the standards in the same section. There was also a lot of repetition. So it had like all of the application requirements for this type of application, and then the process under that, and then all of that repeated again for a different type of application. So it's a lot of just restructuring things in terms of timing. The issue that you're talking about is somewhat difficult to address because for a work session right now, we have to have a complete application. So an applicant can't just come with kind of half-baked plans to a work session at this point. And that's not something that we looked at with this particular amendment change. That's not to say that we couldn't look at it with something else, but the scope of this was really reorganization and getting the process for survey updates and historic status updates into the document.
Other questions?
I have a question. On, I guess it's page 29 of the document, there's a section on exemptions from certificates of appropriateness.
Yes.
And I guess I wasn't clear how that related to what you were just talking about, like clarifying the process, clarifying, et cetera, et cetera. So in particular, I'm wondering about maintenance.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me that might require a definition in the sense that if that's something that's going to be exempt from a requirement for a COA, then, does that include, to use the list that's been crossed out above on the page, tuck pointing, sandblasting, painting, chemical clean, is that maintenance? It's just, there seems to me there's some uncertainty
a little too
there,
broad.
potential uncertainty there.
Yes, that's something that we could definitely look at adding a definition or just some more detail within the ordinance right here in terms of what that means.
Yeah, because it seemed to me like what you meant was sort of cleaning or replacing parts, maybe. But from the perspective of a homeowner, I don't know that the definition would be exactly shared.
Okay, yeah, that's a good suggestion. And the idea behind adding in some exemptions is before our ordinance tried to capture every single scenario when someone did need a COA. Right. And that's a little bit more difficult than capturing the very few exceptions when you don't need a COA. And so we tried to take, the second route, looking at a few examples of things that, a lot of things that we kind of do over the counter, and to see if we could write that up in a way that it could just be exempt from getting a certificate of appropriateness.
Any other questions for staff? Thank you, Amy. I'm going to open the public hearing, and I don't believe we have any community council representatives, but we do have a request by Cindy Cromer to speak. Cindy, would you come on up?
This could run over. I apologize ahead of time. I've been taking notes. First of all, the economic hardship fees are on page 66. It is, as Amy suggested, at the end of your staff report. It is $2,050 plus $200 an hour up to $20,000.
Oh,
I've never made that much per hour. But I went the wrong profession. So I want to provide some context on stucco. I don't know of an adobe structure in this city that does not have stucco on it. So before we say no stucco,
right.
I'd like to see that qualified. And I'd also like to see what was motivating people to apply the stucco, because I think that may document a cultural shift, a way of thinking. I am a product of excessive sterilization and cleanliness in the 50s. I remember all of the bottle sterilization and so forth, and the white paint and so forth. So why was it that people were stuccoing? Were they trying to cover damaged brick? Were they trying to cover dirty brick that had been stained with coal dust and they didn't have other ways of cleaning it? I think that's an interesting question. I am concerned, having appealed a decision of this commission years ago about the requirements for standing, and I will have to do some digging to find those. It was extremely difficult to make an appeal of a landmark decision in a standalone historic district because of the requirements for standing by the person making the appeal. And I do want to share with you that the dramatic makeover that you saw on the lower portion of the non-contributory to contributory slide was done by a former member of this commission, Arla Funk, who really is extraordinary. She was one of the founders of the University Historic District before she became a member of the commission. She was also on the Planning Commission. She's kind of an amazing person. So I'm going to start on my comments about the issue that has been bothering me since the two buildings were delisted from the Central City Historic District last year. These were the MacArthur House and Big Daddy's Pizza, formerly Fendel's Ice Cream. I grew up in the South. When you enter by the front door, you leave by the front door, and you thank your hosts on your way out. So what the city is doing by establishing a process to change contributory structures without a public process amounts to going in the front door and slipping out the back door without saying a word. That's a very layperson's description of what's going on here. There is an elaborate public process to designate a building either contributory, non-contributory. And then it's being handled administratively to change the designation. I'm saying that is not the way I was brought up, and I think there's some other reasons that that should not be the way it's done. Amy Thompson thoughtfully sent me the information about the project on March 13th, and she wrote, and I want to highlight this, that the changes would add process to have the City Council adopting historic surveys for local historic designations and subsequent survey updates. Now, what this says to me is that the surveys will be ordinances under this proposal. I actually believe that the historic districts and the designation of contributory and non-contributory are already ordinances. They are clearly functioning as land use regulations. How would the city be regulating changes otherwise if they weren't ordinances? Through what authority? I'm not a lawyer, you know that. If a property owner wants to change the status, then the change affects the land use. Reversing the public process which occurred during the survey cannot occur administratively, as this proposal suggests. Even if you don't buy my argument about the front door or my arguments about land use regulation, you can certainly understand that as an owner of multiple properties in the Central City Historic District, where I have a vacant, very dilapidated building next to me, that if an owner comes in and wants the status of that building changed, I need to know in terms of protecting my own investment, because that property owner is most likely interested in demolition. And the process to the demolition may take a long time, and I've got to protect my property and my tenants in the interim from vagrancy, fire, drug use, vandalism. So if you don't buy my first two arguments, I think some of you who know what's going on in this city will understand that as a property owner, I need to know that the status of the building next to me is changing.
Stay there, just for a minute. So your biggest complaint is that it would be handled administratively and not come before us?
Right. I want the process to be similar to the process that it took to get the contributory or non-contributory status. And I want to know if a building is going from non-contributory to contributory, too, because I want to jump up and down and praise that property owner. I want to get excited about the person who's done that. I probably will nominate them for some recognition. Okay, because as much as I grump, my business is positive reinforcement. So I want to know about these changes, and I don't want them handled administratively. I did know about the MacArthur House because I was here for the hearings. I wouldn't have known if I hadn't been here for Station 424. And I know the developers of Trolley North, and I suspected they were going to want to take down the Findles building because I know them.
Yeah, that's great. Amy, do you have a response to that? That's an interesting assertion.
A couple things. Right now, believe it or not, we currently don't have in our ordinance that City Council adopts those surveys when they do the designation. That's why we are proposing to add that in, that the City Council is adopting the surveys. So right now, it's assumed that those surveys are adopted, but there's nothing currently in our ordinance that talks about those being adopted.
And we believe that going from contributory, not to interrupt you, to non-contributory or back is applying a land use regulation. So that's why we're setting up this very clean process.
But it's valid to,
Pardon?
about your neighbor or your next door neighbor or your neighborhood wanting to see this designation change, or at least know about it and get some kind of public process about that.
I think it's pretty disingenuous to say that there's not a public process or hasn't been a public process, actually.
So you're not
I
changing-
absolutely take issue with that.
Okay. so
All
you're
of
not
these
changing-
surveys have been through a public process, a robust public process. Not only when the city has hired consultants, they've gone to the Landmark Commission multiple times. We're setting up a process that we think is better for our city records, but that we're applying land use ordinances, and we're asking the council, as part of this text amendment, to let us allow us to use our existing surveys that we have on the books by ordinance. And any new survey that does come through, and they've been gracious enough to provide planning $75,000 a year, because we have a lot of surveys over the past couple decades that are pretty out of date. And the National Park Service recommends every 5 to 10 years to keep our historic building surveys up to date. We have failed at that. And we do have a lot of development in Salt Lake City, and it puts a lot of pressure on you all and on staff to use outdated surveys. Do we have experts on staff? Absolutely we do. And we have an RFP that will be going out any day now to look at Central City. We understand Central City has its issues, and there are other local historic districts that have a lot of pressure and issues as well. It will come before you. It will go to the Planning Commission. We will have public hearings for any new surveys. So there will be a very robust public process, and it will go to our decision makers. And so that's an incredible public process. Now, why we have put what we are doing right now, which we're trying to currently codify with this ordinance, is what we're already doing, which the zoning administrator is a land use body that is able to make administrative decisions. And Amy has shown some prime examples of decisions when we get challenged, right? It's not in a survey that we have on the books, or there's a question about whether that survey is correct. We will be following the standards of periods of significance and historic integrity. There still is a way to appeal that for the public. You will be sent that. It is put on our website. The public is aware of that. If there are questions, they absolutely can appeal that. but there's a method to that madness. So why I say it's disingenuous to say that there hasn't been a public process or that we're not proposing one is because it just is not correct. Do we want an administrative process? Absolutely we do. For the homeowner, what I'm hearing from the public tonight is that we want a 10 to 18 month process for one property to possibly go from non-contributory to contributory, or an out-of-period property to become contributory. What is a homeowner going to do or a developer going to do for 2 years? They're entitled to due process and they are entitled to an answer, and we have the standards on the book as a planning team and expert. If we need to pull other experts in, if there's a question, we absolutely do, but we have those standards on the book and that's a current process, so thank you.
Any other questions? We have no other person here wanting to speak. We did receive one email late today, and there was one other, and those will be entered into the record. So I don't think there's any rebuttal needed here. We just need to go into executive session and discuss amongst ourselves what we think. So, anybody have big thoughts or tiny thoughts? No. All righty then. Well, if one doesn't, then I'm looking for a motion.
I'll make a motion. Based on the information presented in discussion, I move that the commission recommend that the city council adopt this proposal.
I can second that.
All right, the motion has been made by Amanda and seconded by Mike, and so we have a little discussion. Perchance, do you have something to say? You're going like this. No? Any discussion?
Chair DeLay, can I just ask for one point of clarification?
Sure.
In terms of moving the motion forward, would you also like me to look at the definition of maintenance and elaborate on that with the ordinance that moves forward to Planning Commission?
That could be certainly an addendum, an amendment, sorry.
What do others think of that?
Absolutely, definition of, define, yes. Is that good? We
Shall
can
I
add that in?
clarify then?
Yes, please.
All right. Related to the amendment, the motion related to the text amendment related to the H Historic Preservation Overlay District. Based on the information presented in discussion, I move that the commission recommend that the city council adopt this proposal with the clarification of the definition for maintenance. Is that clear enough for you? Yes? Okay.
Great.
And second, Mike? You
I can second that.
Great.
Thank you.
Any discussion? All right, let's do a roll call vote. John?
Aye.
Kenton? Aye. Michael? Bella?
Aye.
Carlton?
Aye.
Michael Abramson?
Aye.
Amanda?
Aye.
Emily's not here. Do I vote?
You do.
Okay, sure, I vote yes. It's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. There is nothing else on the agenda. I did want to bring up two things. Preservation Utah is having its 52nd annual tour of homes, and this year it is Saturday, May 20th, and the area is Federal Heights. You can buy tickets on their website. Also, the State Historic Preservation Convention is June 9th. I think you were all sent an email about that. It's at the Columbus School all day. Just look at your email. And that's all I have. Anything else? Anything from Aubrey? Nope. Then I declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you all.